I was lost. I was looking for anything that could bring some clarity and guidance because I really felt like there was no path forward. Those early days of paddling with Piper and sharing those special moments, it created a spark that took me from a really dark place. It started to create that light again within me that I could feel gratitude that this diagnosis wasn't going to totally define our lives, and trust that what needs to show up will show up, and don't put so much of an emphasis on you need to find it. Be open to the idea that it will find you.
Travis Suit.
So you're the reason why we're here.
It's your fault.
It is your fault.
Incorrect. Piper's the reason why we're here.
She had a part to play, but
I mean, it did come from you, so.
Right. You were part of that. But talk to us about the crossing.
The crossing has been the most impactful experience of my life, on rinse and repeat to some degree. The crossing was born out of the desire to express my love for Piper, my daughter Piper. Piper was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis when she was 4 years old. And you both very well know her story, but for those who are listening, when Piper was born, she was very sick from her infancy. And what that looked like was a lot of coughing, a lot of congestion and mucus. And, you know, when you listen to a child when they have a cough, right, you know, the parent's spidey sense goes off right away. When you hear a child sneeze or cough, or, you know, you kind of look. And so when you hear it over and over and over, like if you hear a child in the room next to you and they're laying in bed and you hear them coughing and hacking, you know, when she was sleeping, she would be coughing and hacking, and it was just like, man, there's something deeply wrong about this. You know, there's just something not right. And we weren't aware that cystic fibrosis, which is a genetic disease, was in our family until Piper was basically at 4, she developed walking pneumonia. And they said, man, something's not right. We got to dig deeper. We need to test further. And those 2 words, cystic fibrosis, changed our life. And that was the opening of, you know, what ultimately was the biggest heartbreak of my life, you know. And I always get emotional talking about it. But when you have a sick child, and when you have a child that is struggling to breathe, it's like nothing else matters. You know, kind of like Josh, what you touched on about, you know, the family unit and really that being the focus. Piper just became the full focus of everything. And so everything else became less meaningful. And the vision that I had of reality of her life, of my life, just was like overnight obliterated and shattered. And it was, John Mayer has a song, Dreaming with a Broken Heart. And that's what it became. It was like learning to dream again, that we can still dream despite the pain and the brokenness and the suffering. And at Piper's first clinic appointment is when we learned that the ocean has these incredible healing benefits for people with CF, because the salt in the air helps to break down any congestion in the lungs, helps to provide better airway clearance for the lungs. So someone with CF can actually can help to clear their lungs naturally. And that began this journey with Piper, you know, and what was to me in the depth of the pain and the heaviness of a diagnosis like that with a child, and this feeling, this sense of being her dad and wanting to empower her and to protect her, feeling like I couldn't do anything about it was really difficult. And so this idea that I could do something about it, and the answer was the ocean, really was so compelling. And what got me onto a paddle board for the first time. And I put Piper on the front of the board. You know, she was a little girl, 4 years old, so her imagination would run wild. And those early days of paddling with Piper out on the water, seeing turtles, watching the sunrise, seeing dolphins and fish and birds, and just being in nature with her and sharing those special moments, it created a spark that took me from a really dark place, and it started to create that light again within me, that I could feel gratitude that, you know, this diagnosis wasn't going to totally define our lives, but we could begin to define our lives with it. And that being on the water with her is what led to the idea of creating a fundraiser, creating an event to support cystic fibrosis, to bring that awareness to this rare disease. And I took Piper to a cheerleading practice, and they didn't like to have the parents there to watch the kids because it made them insecure. They would be a distraction. And so I went to a bookstore, and I was in the magazine aisle just killing time, and I picked up this magazine, and it had an article about how paddling has been a part of our culture as humans for over 10,000 years. You know, they carbon dated canoes that were built, you know, thousands of years ago, and that it was always this voyaging is in our nature, to go out and to go from island to island or place to place, to navigate with the stars. And it occurred to me, I hadn't up until that moment realized, oh man, you know, this paddling, which was a hobby, stand-up paddling with Piper, people were doing it, but doing it as an endurance challenge. And I had always been an endurance athlete, and I thought, man, that would be really cool to do something where this can become a vehicle to create awareness. And that's when the idea hit me. I wonder if you could paddle from the Bahamas to Florida, because I had been to Bimini once by boat. I was aware of it, and I knew the Gulf Stream went north, and it just clicked in that moment. You could do it. If you just paddled out there, you could keep going and keep going and keep going, and likely you could get there. And that was the birth of the crossing.
Amazing. And so that the first crossing, you tried to go Bimini to Miami.
We tried to get to, you know, in 2013, which was the first year we did the crossing. There were 4 paddlers and 2 boats, and we left Bimini, and our goal was to get back to West Palm Beach.
Okay.
To get back to the Palm Beach Inlet, which was over 90 miles. But we were calculating, I had met with a few people. I met with one young woman who had paddled from Cuba to Key West, you know, and I was exploring all of the you know, we were trying to work out the timing and how long. We thought it was going to take 20 to 22 hours to get across. And of course, in the first crossing, we had a lot of wind and rough weather, and it blew us across. So we got across in 15 and a half hours or so. But that was the first journey, was from Bimini back to West Palm Beach.
And that first journey, like, talk to me, like, after you finished. You know, I've seen the photos of you on the dock with Piper, and like, what were you feeling or thinking in that moment?
Yeah, it's a loaded question, because I was feeling a lot, and definitely feeling a sense of accomplishment, that we had all done it together, right? And I think the biggest thing I learned through that first crossing process was how powerful it is to heal in being held by a community. I never experienced that. And it's what inspired me to want to create Piper's Angels, because knowing what it's like, how isolating it is to have a rare disease, to be in the hospital for long periods of time, to be kind of battling something where you have to be so intensely focused on it right in front of you. And so the rest of the world kind of falls away, but then to feel that outside support is such a huge lift for your heart, and healing, and really healing to feel that love pour in. And so I was feeling a lot of that. But I was also feeling a very demoralizing sense of failure, because what in my mind I had set out to do, like that very diehard athlete, the very egocentric, like, you know, dad who's going to do this for his daughter, very like, you know, going out there, and there was something like within me that I wanted to prove it to myself, you know, and ultimately the goal was to paddle from the Bahamas to Florida nonstop, right? But that's not what happened. We had really rough weather, 4 to 6 to 6 to 8 foot swells. We were falling off our boards hundreds of times throughout the night, hypothermic, seasick, nauseous, fatigued, and it got really dangerous. And I mean, to the point that, we all had to really come together and make a decision that we made it till around 3 o'clock in the morning. And then we decided we're going to relay until sunrise. And I remember being on the board on my hands and knees and in excruciating pain, seasick, nauseous, dry heaving, and just feeling like, one, I couldn't believe I got all these people into this. I felt guilty. I was like, I can't believe that this is the result, right? And two, we didn't accomplish what I thought we had set out to do. But my mind, in looking back, right, it was very much absorbed into needing to complete it, to feel that within myself, and not recognizing how massive of a win it was of what we did together, and the awareness and the funds we raised and everything that came together. But still on the inside, I felt like I cheated, or I felt like I hadn't really done what I told people I was going to do. And that was a major blow to my ego at the time. For me, the thing with Piper, it was kind of like, if I had been struck by lightning the next week, my whole process with this diagnosis with her was like, I didn't want fear to overcome her reality. I didn't want fear. And I had been seeing a lot of other families who were going through this process. And when fear was the mind state of the parents, it reflected right onto the children. And with chronic illness and, the risk of contamination and all these issues, you really can get caught up in a massive mindset of fear. And I wanted her to be able to really get beyond that. And so the idea of the crossing was to do something so big that if you put it out there in such a big way that there was no other way but to own it, to be vulnerable with it. And so to have that moment with her in the completion of it, and I'll never forget her running up and really giving me this big hug. It almost knocked me over. That was it. That was what mattered most.
Yeah. So then fast forward to, and that's beautiful. Thank you that it's the full range of what you experienced in a single moment. But fast forward, bring us to, 2017 and beyond, and walk us through, the vision of Piper's Angels, the evolution of the crossing, and just how that journey has unfolded for you over the years.
The process that diagnosis really put me into, and as we've been talking about these deep transformative progressions, in our life, I was still having a very difficult time facing the reality of what this meant for the rest of our life with this child who was very sick. And so that first crossing, it was a great completion, and for me, it was the introduction. And this is what I always say about Piper. She's really been my biggest teacher about what devotion is, because you have to keep coming back, right? And reinvesting that devotion, especially into children. And in a sense where they have a chronic illness, it's even a more hyper intensive experience with them, to be by their side and to hold their hand through all of that pain and physical illness. And I was having a real hard time processing it. And my faith in God had been challenged. My ability to cope, I had very few tools. I didn't know what I was doing. I was a young entrepreneur who had a lot of dreams about what I wanted to create in the world. And everything that I thought I wanted to create then became less meaningful. It got challenged and it was fractured. And so I was lost. I went in this kind of period between the first crossing in 2017. That was like a dark night of the soul. And I was looking for anything that could give me grounding and could help bring some clarity and guidance, because I really felt like I didn't know where to go, what to do. There was no path forward. And And really one of the more powerful aspects of that time frame was this introduction invitation that I had. And it's kind of a funny story because I was actually I was emceeing a finish line for a cycling event that was also a fundraiser. And I've always been called to be on the mic. It's always been something fun to me. I enjoy it. I feel like the energy get amplified. And I was on the mic at this finish line event, and the weeks leading up to that, I had been researching online ayahuasca because I had heard that it could be healing and transformative. And I felt like I needed something intense or strong to help get me out of the funk I was in, right? At that time, I was still drinking alcohol. I was still occasionally smoking marijuana. And I just felt, really out of it. I was working multiple jobs, and I was at that finish line event, and I'm on the mic, and I look down and I see this guy walking down the street, and he had long flowing hair. And I sit on the mic and say, "Hey, dude, I love your hair." I'm trying to entertain the audience, the crowd. The whole thing was between people crossing the finish line. And he's like, hey, I see him, and he just comes at a beeline straight towards me. And he walked right up to me and he said, "Yeah, man, I like your hair," because I had long hair at the time. And I looked down and he had beads on his wrist. And I said, "Hey, I like your beads." And he said, "Oh, do you sit with the medicine?" And I said, I don't know, but I think I know what you're talking about. And he's like, "Yeah, well, I sit with a group, in Miami, and it's an ayahuasca ceremony rooted in this indigenous culture. You're welcome to come and join us." And I couldn't believe it. I'd been researching online, right? And it was in my awareness, and then all of a sudden it appeared, and it was like, okay, this is a green light, right? And that invitation began now over 10 years of sitting in different indigenous ceremonial spaces with plant medicine. But that really began a very powerful part of the healing journey that ultimately led from sitting in that way and being with myself in those spaces with that deep introspection that it offers, that led to the clarity that I've got to drop all this other stuff. This stuff is not working for me. And it was hard because I had investors in businesses. I had launched brands. My dad was an investor. I had all these ties to what I had been doing, relationships I had built. And it was like letting go of that felt like it was like I was dying.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was really hard. I was purging a lot of emotion through that time frame. I couldn't talk to any. They'd say, "How are you doing? How's Piper?" And I would just start crying. I was really raw and vulnerable. But being in that place, it brought me to a crossroads. And I had a mentor at the time who I was his bartender, and that's how I met him. And he had invited me in to potentially have a job with his company. And I just couldn't take the job. And I finally had got the courage to go in and sit down and talk with him. And I said, "Hey, look, I am having a really hard time right now making this decision. Like, this is really, and I am crying, right?" And he said, "Look, Travis, I had a similar experience, and I didn't know this about him." He said, "But my daughter got sick when she was about 10 years old. And I had to, for a period of 4 years, I had to tell all my business partners, I had to tell everybody, look, I need to go be with my daughter." And he said, "It sounds like that's where you're at. You need to focus on her and just pour your love and energy into her right now and just focus on that." And that gave me freedom to make the decision in that moment that that's what I'm going to do. I don't know what that looks like, but that's what I'm going to do. And that was the beginning in 2017 of the launch of Piper's Angels Foundation and the bringing the crossing back.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that's when I got involved in Matti as well. And I remember it was like 30 paddlers that first year. And then when you add the support boats and the volunteers and everything, it was much larger. But small, intimate group that first year in the relaunch. So starting there and what that new journey that had opened up, like walk us through the vision of Piper's Angels and the impact that it has had on the cystic fibrosis community?
Well, it became very clear being in the trenches with Piper and the disease, and there's too much of a volume to share here. But my oldest half sister Leanne was also diagnosed with cystic fibrosis, and that came into the family. And my sister Nikki, and ultimately Nikki and I both have a form of CF. And so there's 4 people in our family with cystic fibrosis, and that unfolded over about 8 years. So I want to acknowledge that this hit our family in more than just a way. A lot of people know Piper's story, but what my sister Leanne has gone through was tremendously impactful, because I was witnessing her health journey and battle from a very young age, and she was always a guiding light, but we didn't know what was wrong because she was diagnosed late in life. I feel like, as someone who always felt called to be an entrepreneur, always felt called to be in creation of something, and that entrepreneurial spirit, when my focus and energy shifted to something that was, this calling with CF, the needs of the families and what they were going through on a daily basis was what I was trying to solve. Because it was kind of like, if you're walking by somebody and they got hit by a car, or they're on the street and they're hurting and they need help. For me, I can't walk by and not feel called to help in that moment. And that's what it felt like to me. It was like, here I'm looking around and there's hundreds of families that are going through this and maybe didn't have the support, the resources that my family did. And there were a lot of needs being unanswered. It's like, it's a rare disease. So there's not that many people who have it, roughly 50,000 in the US. And so there just wasn't a lot of attention. And because cystic fibrosis is a disease progression that children were dying from in their infancy in the 70s to now living well beyond into their 30s, 40s, 50s, and beyond, the real question had become like, what's the cost of buying more time with a progressive disease? And so the financial burden, the physical burden, the mental and emotional burden, when unfortunately, if you had a child with CF in the 70s, if they died at 5 years old, that was maybe a painful chapter, but it was a short one. And you may have lived with that the rest of your life, but kind of that journey was over. Whereas now, somebody living with CF it's a lifetime, and not only for the family, but then for that person. So there's a lot of challenges that come up. And so I saw a need for innovative solutions, to think differently, to bring an entrepreneurial spirit to the nonprofit community for CF. And that was it. I had no idea what we were really going to do. I knew that the ocean was beneficial for people with CF. So I had this idea of creating saltwater scholarships, right, for people to participate in saltwater activities. But it was very much a very experimental process. And I had never been in a nonprofit. And so building a nonprofit from the ground up is incredibly difficult and challenging. And, building out the operations while also building out the programming too. And also thinking through like how this relates, because, as Matti knows, like when you're creating a brand and an affinity for it, like most nonprofits, they're very heart-centered, but a lot of times they're very mom and pop. And so at least the grassroots nonprofits, so they kind of overlook actually running it like a business and building it to have sustainability and building a brand that people can relate to in that sense. And so it was kind of all of that coming in to help usher in what would become Piper's Angels Foundation and the continued growth and development of the crossing.
Yeah. Do you know off the top of your head to date how much money the Piper's Angels has raised for the cystic fibrosis community?
I know the crossing has raised right at around $5 million over the years. And we've supported over 1,400 families, with direct assistance. And yeah, I think for that journey, it's been 10 years. One of the things I underestimated most was stepping into a role of advocacy and what that meant, and owning that, because we all have to become our own advocates for something. And when we are really rooted in something that we do have purpose in, then the advocacy really can come to life and you feel that sense of vocational arousal. But when you put yourself into a role of advocacy or you step into an area that maybe you haven't been in, but there's a great sense of vulnerability, one of the things that comes up is like, for me, I didn't realize I was putting myself right in the trajectory of families who were losing maybe their children, right? And all of a sudden I'm in conversation with all these parents and how difficult it was for them, how difficult it was to some of the people with CF, the intensity of the disease progression, down to their last breaths, right? Talking to a mom who's losing her child. And I wasn't a licensed therapist. I'm not a licensed therapist, right? But all of those conversations and how meaningful they were to see what it was really like.
Would be great to hear just an update on like how Piper is. Obviously, we've had a lot of interaction with Piper. Piper's the same age as my eldest daughter, and so it's been wonderful seeing her growth over these years that we've been brothers. Maybe just give an update on Piper, and then maybe from there, like what lessons have you taken from that, the journey around and discovery of really health and wellness broadly that you've really now incorporated into kind of your daily life and vocational life on a go-forward basis?
Well, Piper's doing great. And I mean, that is a blessing because, she was really sick up until 12. And so she had 3 to 4 hospitalizations a year for long-term periods of time. And she ended up with a feeding tube for 2 years. She ended up with a port that went into her heart for intravenous antibiotics and steroids for multiple years. It was a rough road. And fortunately, I consider it a miracle that when she turned 12, the month she turned 12, a new medication came out for people with CF that was a game changer. And when she started that medication, a lot of her symptoms cleared up. And from 12 to 18 now, she has lived a fairly normal life. And she's gotten to have a very beautiful and normal experience of being a high schooler, right? And she continued to be a competitive cheerleader. And she, as many children who have battled maybe a chronic illness or something in their life, they often have a very deep appreciation and awareness around how precious time, energy, life is. And so it's been one of just the biggest blessings to watch her go through high school, to live, laugh, play, enjoy every moment and thrive. Whereas, that was unimaginable just a few years ago. And so to live in a day and age where that's possible is incredible. And now she's going to be off to college, right? Like our daughters are flying the nest, and to see her grow and to have that independence and to watch her journey and her health journey, ultimately flourish. And she still has her challenges, but it's been such a beautiful, beautiful thing to witness. To speak to the nature of investigating what it is to live in a holistic and healthy way, right? When you are faced with 1, chronic illness every day, and 2, the mortality that life is shorter for some than others. And what that drove me to really, in my infinite curiosity to explore, was just anything and everything that could gain ground, like even an inch, right? For what health and wellness might look like for Piper, for our family, for the CF community. And that, of course, led into, studying and researching a lot of different Eastern traditions, wisdom traditions, in meditation, Qigong, Reiki, yoga, and even, shamanic cultures, and really deepening into anything and everything that would become nourishing for the heart, for the soul, and for the full expression of myself in my own health and wellness and leadership. And really, I think the thing that has stood out to me the most is like our energy matters so much. Like, it's how we bring ourselves to our life. And when you see somebody battling a chronic illness, often you notice right away the depletion of their energy. And so it's like, what on this spectrum, if 1 is totally depleted and 10 is fully supercharged, how do we bring ourselves fully every day? And that, for me, has been cutting out alcohol, right? Cutting out different foods that were maybe not supporting me in my health, and really investigating like what are the greatest possible tools to maximize our ability to have the capacity to show up for our family, to show up for our friends, our life, our purpose. And that's really what's floored me the most over the last few years, and carried my enthusiasm into even bigger and bigger expressions.
Yeah. And I think that's wonderful. And it's been so amazing to watch your journey. But what are some of those tools and practices specifically that you have incorporated into your life that you've seen shift your energy?
Well, just on the topic of energy, what's important for me to note is that the plant medicine journey opened my perception to what energy is. Because previously to that, I was looking at a very dense world made of things. And now that's not what I see. Now I just see the nature of consciousness as it's flowing and it's activated in its energetic state, that we're really these energy beings. And seeing that capacity in someone and feeling and sensing energy on a subtle level that goes beyond just the form, but the formless, is what really attracted me to practices like Qigong. Studying Qigong, practicing Qigong, facilitating Qigong. My wife, Danny, was so generous in purchasing for me a Qigong teacher training. And it's been such a transformative practice and tool in my life. And Qigong is a 5,000 plus year old practice, a preventative healthcare practice, right? Because before you could go to a doctor or a hospital, you would try to do everything you could not to get sick. Really understanding the philosophy and benefits of some of these energy practices. Kriya Yoga has been another one. Kriya Yoga meditation, and really working with the energy system on a deeper level. And I think what's been most transformative for me is not looking at a body from the outside in, but understanding that there's a blueprint for how the energy in the system runs from the inside out. And that blueprint is actually most supportive to our health. We always think about what we eat or what we drink or what we're doing to the body, but really what's behind that and what's supporting that, to me, has the greater potential and magnitude for how we show up in our life. And as that conversion within myself, kind of that transmutation of energy and consciousness to living in a more subtle energy state, tuning into my energy in a different way, understanding we're all these incredibly powerful interconnected instruments that are connected to this massive magnetic energy of the earth. We're connected to this massive supercharge of electronic energy in the atmosphere and the sun, and being a channel of that, I think, is really what's opened me up the most in all of those practices. And so Reiki is another practice that I really love. And it's an embodiment of the understanding that we are a channel of energy. And so the most important thing you can do is to get out of your own way. And it's not you doing it. It's like, where is all this energy coming from? It's not, we're not creating it. It's coming from a source. And really tuning into that source has been really powerful.
For those who maybe aren't familiar with Qigong, can you give a example of just kind of like what it is, maybe a little bit deeper into the practice?
Yeah, so Qi, energy, Gong, work, skillful energy work, working with our energy, and it's a somatic energy practice. So working with our bodies, our breath, our mind, to cultivate, to clear any stagnant energy that may be preventing our health from flourishing, to open ourselves, to create more circulation in the body, and to just balance and harmonize the different energies and elements that we carry within us so that we become more coherent. And by being more coherent, it strengthens our immune system. If you're somebody with chronic illness, you need to be in the greatest coherence for your immune system possible. And So it's those simple practices, breathing, movement, but doing it in a very conscious and intentional way.
Yeah.
To cultivate more vital life force energy.
Yeah, I know for me, I've been studying now under your teacher for the last 4 or 5 months, and I've always considered myself very health conscious, physically fit. But, sitting at a desk all day, every day, or most days, it's just so much tension, in my neck, in my traps, in my upper back. And that's where I hold my stress, right? And I think the most amazing benefit that I've received from diving deep in the Qigong over these last few months is like that pain gone, which I've never experienced that as like an adult who, is working a corporate job, sitting at a desk. Just like never thought I would be so pain-free by doing something gentle. I mean, Qigong is generally a gentle practice. And so it's just been amazing to really do that deep dive.
The purpose of the podcast with the wisdom matrix, right? We live in this fragmented world. And when you look around, psychologists don't measure people on a scale of energy. They measure them on a scale of depletion in their surveys because people feel so depleted. And so understanding that why, and that's what I really want to bring myself into with people as I make a transition from being a full-time staff member at Piper's Angels to now president of the board, continuing to help guide the ship of Piper's Angels to create greater impact, but from a board level, from an investment level, and to make sure and ensure the mission continues to have the effectiveness that it's been designed for, but really taking all of those tools and aspects of what for me has become a journey of self-mastery. And that journey is never over. We're always a student. And so where I want to really step into the opportunity to be a coach, right, in self-mastery with people is with entrepreneurs, leaders, people who are heart-centered, who are going through or have been through similar transitions and transformations as I've been through in my life with Piper or diagnosis, creating something that was so impactful, right? Creating this learning to dream again with a broken heart, but really doing it from a place of compassion and what I feel so called to bring is to really lift people up and the gifts that they have. Because I think we all have these incredibly powerful latent gifts within us, and to align people's gifts within them to their dharma, to what they really can bring to the world in their truest, highest sense of purpose, and to help them evolve through that process and to provide the tools to bring them to a place where they can create that business, they can create that dream, they can go through that transition and be held and supported and know that every prayer will be answered. The dream that they're going to dream is going to happen and come true. And I feel that so deeply because, as you two know, you have supported me in full devotion to the dream of Piper's Angels Foundation. And so I know what it feels like to have a vision, to come from a place of pain and to turn it into something very purposeful and build it into, something that can create a tangible impact in the world on people in their lives. And I feel like that's where I'm being called to a new evolution in my own transformation is to bring that out and help others do what I've been so blessed to have been supported and creating through Piper's Angels Foundation.
Yeah. So I have a question. Ever since I've known you, which is now coming up on 10 years, like you've always had high energy, infectious enthusiasm. You've always been sharp. And you just mentioned like your ability to create a vision, but then execute on it. Like, where did that come from?
It's a fantastic question. And I think that everybody has the capacity for vision. And we often don't put enough emphasis on it. So if you sat down with somebody and you really asked them, like, what's the vision for your life? We really don't spend enough time investing in that vision. Because of Piper, I was forced to, or guided, to reevaluate in that moment what was most important for the vision of my life and the vision of Piper's life. And so that challenged me to bring a really intense level of clarity. I think everybody has that capacity, but we often don't just invest in it enough. Well, I had a dream one time, and in the dream, there was this, what appeared to me as a shaman, some sort of indigenous man who showed up in the dream, and he was doing this with his hands. And it wasn't like a dream. It was like a lucid, clear vision, right? And he's in the dream and he's doing this with his hands. And I'm like entranced by what he's doing. And it was like a telepathic communication. And what he said was, it's one thing to have a vision, but it's another thing to hold the vision. Because there's this capacity that you have to have, this energy, focus, concentration, that you don't get distracted by the other things and that you stay with it. Manifestation is such a big conversation and topic these days, but we clearly are co-creators with the divine creator. And we are given this capacity to create. And we're here together in a new creation. And a big reason I'm excited to be a part of this is because it's Matti's vision. And I'm so excited to be a part of supporting the vision of Maya wellness and what that can become, the vision of what we're holding for the wisdom matrix, right? I think vision is the most underestimated power that we have as a human, whether that's can be rooted in the vision you carry into every moment, your presence with your child, to the vision you have of what you believe is the divine within you and in the world around you, and holding that vision. My vision these days, is to see God in everyone and everything. It's the only thing that matters to me, is to not divert from that. And then my purpose is to empower the gifts in others so they can realize their full potential. And whatever relationships I step into, I always want to be there with it in whatever that is.
I think the process, and you hit on it, it's like we spend generally, I think as a society, and definitely, if you look at like the traditional school system and bringing kids up, there's a lot of time spent on memorization and math and history and all these things, but not a ton of time spent on like, what is the vision for your life, right? How do you get to your dharma, as you're speaking, and then what are the tools, to help you get there? Though we're seeing some of that starting to percolate in some schools, which is kind of more of a life design type courses, which is amazing. But one aspect, one experience that I know you had early on was in the military, and would love maybe just talk a little bit about that and how that influenced that experience, how that influenced how you think about developing a vision, but then executing against that vision.
Yeah. So my dad got me a BB gun for Christmas when I was 5 years old. My dad was in the Marine Corps. You're trained to be a rifleman. I was at 5 years old. My journey of being a rifleman began. And my BB gun became my best friend, and it took me into the outdoors in ways I could have never imagined, and I'm so grateful for. But ultimately, my dad was quietly training me to be, at least to carry the principles and core values of what a Marine is, right? Honesty, integrity, courage, devotion. So it was always instilled in me. When I had the opportunity in college, my dad said to me, look, you can enlist and go in the Marine Corps, but if you go to college, which I intended to do to play football, then you'll go in as an officer, and the difference is night and day. And so I would encourage you to go to officer candidate school. And so that's what I did. And it was without a doubt one of the most impactful experiences of my life, because they really, in the Marine Corps, they tell you, we're not born leaders. You can be trained to be a leader. And so when you step foot on the tarmac, or when you show up, your entire identity is stripped away from you, right? They shave your head, they bring you in. And it's a much bigger story, but ultimately this idea that we have a capacity within us for leadership that is so much more than we realize. And the only way to know that is to be tested, is for somebody to inspect it within you, to look at you very closely, and closely examine every single move that you make and really look. And whether that's you looking at yourself which is hard for people to do, or somebody else looking at you. You know, it matters in your behavior, in everything that you do. And so to be evaluated that way, to be empowered that way was extremely significant in my development. And I carry with me those principles. Ultimately, the Marine Corps was not the path that I chose. Much like Josh mentioned, you know, I had a lot going on in my life. It was also a very tumultuous time emotionally and relationships. And I, again, kind of didn't know the direction I wanted to take. But what I felt was that the Marine Corps, I celebrate our military in the Marine Corps in many, many ways for what it represents on a principle basis. But the weaponization of a human ultimately to kill other people didn't resonate within me as the next step. And so I diverged from that path, and I had the option to not accept the commission. So I didn't. And I grappled with that for many years. I had dreams about it, you know, and felt guilty about it, and I had the judgment from my dad, and you know what that would look like, and kind of the people I had earned relationships to and walked away from. But what it gave me in hindsight, now 20-something years later, is that a young person can be molded, right? Our brains, our bodies can be molded. And when you're given the right opportunity, you can discover so much in yourself that you don't realize is there, but you have to be given the opportunity. It has to be in the right set and setting and the right container. And those trials and tribulations, those rites of passage, that initiation, we've lost a sense of that in this culture. And, you know, I think it's making a comeback, but I do believe that the three of us are sitting here as kind of in the wisdom matrix sense, is an amalgamation of like all of these traditions and cultures and tools that are now accessible to all of us because of technology, because of modern life, and harnessing them into what I would call a sacred path of self-mastery, like bringing yourself to that. I believe there can be an opportunity, and it's one vision I'm excited about exploring through Maya, is creating an opportunity for people, whether it's young people or wherever they're at, to be able to step into a safe, sacred container for the development of their conscious leadership, heart-centered leadership, and self-mastery, utilizing whatever tools we have at our disposal and fingertips. And it can really be a way to support people and guide people through those transitions in life. And I definitely feel called to walk beside people on that path.
Beautiful, beautiful. As we wrap up here, you're a deep student, and you always will be. And I love all your book recommendations. And when I receive a nice little package in the mail with a new book of wisdom from Travis, it's always a delight. So for listeners who are maybe just starting consciously this path of, you know, self-mastery and really looking to, you know, begin that exploration, is there a starting point, like a book that you say this would be the first book I would give you to dive into,
or a teacher or mentor? You know?
My suggestion would be to go sit down in a quiet space and go inside and ask yourself that question. Go inside and ask your heart, what is being called to me right now? Where do I feel like I need to go? Who am I looking for to show up in the mirror of reality? Praying to be emptied, to be filled with what God will bring you. And trust that what needs to show up will show up, and don't put so much of an emphasis on that you need to find it. And I would emphasize more that be open to the idea that it will find you. Just be more receptive in that open state, and just keep asking yourself, keep asking over and over and over, what is this within me that's feeling called to something higher, deeper, and just keep asking that question. And I think that I trust and I feel that what is in divine synchronicity and timing will show up for those people. But people need to be willing to go inside and sit with themselves and ask. And that to me is the door. That's the gateway to whatever will come next.
Beautiful. Well said. Well, thank you, brother.
Yeah.
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 More fun conversations to come.
Yeah. Thank you for the exploration and being present and being here. And thank you for being the men that you have been with me on this journey.
Thank you for always leading by example, brother.
Oh, yeah. Being the energy, the big bundle ball of energy that gets people all excited and riled up and paddling 80 miles across the ocean to the unknown. It's a beautiful thing.
You've created quite a movement and community.
And so it is. And it begins again.
Yeah.
Again and again.
I like to say, may it be so, and so it is. Aho.